You're right.
All right.
All right, let's go in 3, 2, 1. Hey guys, welcome to Game On. My name is Hugh Johnson, and today we've got a special episode for you. We're going to be talking about the inaugural class into the World Video Game Hall of Fame put on by the Strong National Museum of Play in upstate New York. With me today, I've got my co-editors, John Wenzel and Joe Wynn. In case you haven't heard, last week the Strong National Museum of Play announced its inaugural class into the 2015 Hall of Fame. These inductees include Doom, Pac-Man, Super Mario Bros., Pong, Tetris, and World of Warcraft. Guys, a lot of historic and iconic titles spanning many decades of gaming is included in this list. What do you guys think? What's your reaction to the inaugural class?
You know, when I take a look at any Hall of Fame, I mean, that inaugural class has to be the thing that defines that industry, right? So you look at like the 6 games that were chosen here. I mean, they were chosen not only because they revolutionized the gaming industry, but they made a major impact into pop culture. Like, these games are mainstream. You look at like Pac-Man, it's like you see how many people that have Pac-Man shirts out there. You look at a game like Doom, right? So yeah, Wolfenstein 3D popularized like the first-person shooter industry, but Doom was that game that got like, you know, mainstream attention because of its violence. But beyond that, I mean, it took first-person shooters to a completely different level. You get multiplayer gaming in it, and God, they even made a movie out of this.
Right.
Yeah.
Terrible one, but a movie nonetheless.
We won't talk about that.
John, what do you think?
I would agree with Joe. I don't think there's any really egregious omissions from that list. I think you could make the case for certain other games. A lot of people have brought up Zelda. But it's a really strong list because the games that were chosen are very representative of the games that came before them and the games that they influenced. So, you know, I think about Super Mario Brothers and Tetris in particular. These were 2 games that came out with the original Nintendo Entertainment System. They were in arcades a little bit before that. But Mario Brothers in particular was bundled with the original NES when it came out in 1985. And that was such a great version of platforming, which was kind of an early genre at that time, a nascent genre. But, you know, it was one of the first games to really have characters,
Right.
to have a narrative, to have a story you could follow. And like any good game, it had, you know, simple to understand rules, but it was also very hard to master. So that made it endlessly replayable, really great level design. So, you know, it's interesting that there were, you know, games like Pitfall and these really kind of crude platformers, and Mario just perfected that. And then, obviously, it influenced tons of games that came after that. Same with Tetris, simple to understand, hard to master. You know, it was in arcades before that. It went hugely into the mainstream via the NES and the Game Boy, too, which was, you know, one of the best, most sophisticated early handheld systems. So I think those are great games. I mean, I'm a child of the 80s. I played them a ton when I was growing up, and it's hard to argue with them.
Right, right. Well, you mentioned being a child of the 80s, and the biggest surprise for me was World of Warcraft, because when you look at this lineup of games, they're so iconic and just like decades old.
Right.
And this game is like, what, 10, 11 years old? But to Joe's point about pop culture, look how much this game has done to put MMORPGs on the map. That's massively multiplayer online RPGs for those of you who aren't in the know. But yeah, look how it's done between Leroy Jenkins, which ironically like turned 10 years old, and you know the fabled story of this guy screaming into his microphone as he runs into a room with a bunch of enemies. And then a personal favorite of mine is the South Park episode where they play Warcraft. That's always a fun one. But you look at the numbers behind this game, 100 million accounts, 500 million characters spanning 244 countries. That's like some stats just released last year. And you, even though it's not an older game, like in terms of some of these other ones it's paired with, it definitely deserves to be on there.
Absolutely. I mean, that game alone like brought in more than $10 billion.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So guys, next year, who are you guys wanting to see for the next class of the Strong Museum's World Video Game Hall of Fame?
You know, I mean, gosh, there's so many games that are on the list that are very deserving of it. I mean, look at the list of finalists. I mean, you have games like Oregon Trail. I mean,
Right.
which kid that grew up in America has never played Oregon Trail? Pokemon, I think, is one that's probably has, like, if I were to be a betting man, I'd be on it. My thing is the finalist list were like they omitted two genres, which kind of like made me a little angry.
You're talking about this year, right?
This year,
Okay.
yeah. So I'm talking about sports and fighting games. So talk about Street Fighter. Street
All right.
Fighter also had a terrible movie. So
While we're on the subject.
while we're on the subject, Street Fighter had a terrible movie, Mortal Kombat 2, but Street Fighter was the one that made like one-on-one fighting games where you can select a character popular. And I think that's a game that should have been on like at least a finalist list.
Right.
And sports games, I mean, gosh, you can go Tecmo Super Bowl. I mean, it's a little bit more of a cult classic, but without it, there's never would have been like Madden, of how massively big Madden has gotten.
And you think about like how many YouTube videos you see, right, of people playing out current simulations in Tecmo Super Bowl mode, like Malcolm Butler's Super Bowl interception in the Super Bowl 49 against the Seattle Seahawks. You know, you can find that on YouTube. John, what about you?
There's obviously stuff you could nitpick and sort of, select for inclusion next year. But like I said, I think this was a really strong first list, and I think it sent a message. I think it said, implicitly that sports games and fighting games, for example, in the early days of gaming just weren't that good. They just weren't sophisticated enough to do a great job with that, because Street Fighter obviously came later, way later than Pong, but certainly also even later than, some of these early to mid 80s games. But, I would like to see Zelda on there. I think Zelda really helped popularize role-playing games for the mainstream. As simplistic as it is, if you go back and play it today, the original 8-bit version, it's a great game still. It's a compelling game. You could play it on your, if you have an emulator, you can play it on your phone, and it's still really fun and engaging. I wouldn't mind seeing some sci-fi games. I think Space Invaders, even though it was popular, wasn't necessarily the best version of that style of game. Some people like Galaga, which is a little newer, a little more sophisticated, better. But I would still like to see it on there. I think its popularity speaks to something, and you have to recognize why it was popular. What did it tap into? What did it get people excited about? So I wouldn't mind seeing that on there.
Okay. For me, I might be skipping ahead a little bit, but I think you got to look at Super Mario 64. 3D, three dimensions, such a big part of gaming nowadays. Like it's commonplace and it's overlooked. But back then, making the transition, taking a game like Super Mario Bros. Into the 3D realm was a big deal, and it's not an easy transition to make. I mean, the guys who make Sonic the Hedgehog still kind of struggle with it. I can't remember the last good Sonic game I played, but Nintendo got it right back in 1996, whether it was listening to the music of Dire Dire Docks or the first time you grabbed Bowser's tail and swung him around and threw him into the little bomb or whatever. I think that game let us see the Mushroom Kingdom in a way that we'd never seen it before. So that would be my vote. But
yeah, it definitely opened up the possibilities of a 3D interactive self-contained world like that. And in some ways, it was one of the first open world 3D games.
Right.
Because even though you had different levels, you could kind of go back and revisit them and find little Easter eggs and hidden things. And yeah, I mean, that if you're going to look at where a lot of the, tropes and mechanics of current 3D games came from, that's easily one of them.
Right. Joe, John, I want to thank you guys for coming on the show today. That's it for today, folks. Thanks for joining us. You can follow us at DPTV or follow me at Hugh Johnson DP. And be sure to comment in the comment section below and cast your vote for who you think should be in the Video Game Hall of Fame. And next week, I'll go into that game. Thanks for watching.